2017, I lived in Calcutta, India for half a year. And if I can be honest with you, I witnessed so much injustice. I was honestly surrounded by it every single day. Real humans who are so loved and deserve dignity and food and shelter on the streets with nothing. Children living in train stations without families or food. I would hang out with them every single day. This is a reality for many, not just in India, but other parts of the world too. And you know what? This is a reality in our own city. It might look differently in different parts of the world, but it is happening in our own city. And this is just one aspect of injustice. Bullying is another aspect of injustice. When I was in grade school, I was made fun of. Let me just be real. I share the same experience that perhaps some of you have had, or maybe still have. I was made fun of for my faith, my weight in the midst of some medical issues. When I was younger, I had a few medical issues, big ones, and I was on medication, and like my cheeks, not an exaggeration, were huge. Like huge. This was just one of the side effects of the medication. But I was made fun of for it, right? This is just a reality in my past. And here's the deal. Injustice looks like all sorts of things, but injustice is very real. It's worse for some than others. And I'm not here to start arguments or to, play this game of, well, you call that injustice. That's not true injustice. What I experienced is way more intense, or what those people are experiencing doesn't even compare to what you experienced. We're not playing that game. What we want to do is just kind of look at injustice in general and understand that the definition is really things in our world that are not right, unfair, or unequal. We covered that in week 1 of our series. And here's the deal. It's painful to experience injustice, and it makes us all ask the question, why doesn't somebody do something? And it's even worse when injustice is ongoing, systemic, and constant. You see, last week we talked about how God sees and cares about what's happening. God is anti-injustice. And part of following Jesus means we care about the things that he cares about, enough to do something about them. So maybe you hear that and you think, well, that's great, but what about me? And so if you've been the victim of injustices like racism, oppression, discrimination, prejudice, you know what that feels like. And I am so sorry. And if you haven't, it's no secret that other people have experienced these things. In fact, honestly, the people around you, the people that you know, take time to get to know their stories, and you'll probably come across some instances of injustice that they have experienced. Look at the news. It is happening. Injustice is real. Even if you haven't experienced it yourself, we can have empathy for those in our lives that have experienced injustice on all sorts of different levels. And so if you're watching this and you've ever experienced any sort of injustice, you may be watching and wondering, well, how do I handle this when it's happening to me and not just around me? Or maybe others of you are thinking, well, that's not me. That's not my story. I've never experienced it. And I get that too. But here's the deal. As family, when one of us suffers, we all suffer. This is a great opportunity, again, for you to hear what injustice feels like to someone that is experiencing it so that you can do something about it. And so if you're experiencing injustice or have experienced injustice, what do we do? What do you do when you feel like you're alone in that? And so with that in mind, I want to tell you a true story about 3 friends and what happened to them. And so in the Bible, there's a Babylonian king named Nebuchadnezzar, who was very powerful. He had conquered and captured Israel. And one day, what he does is he builds a giant golden statue that stood 90 feet tall. That's crazy. And he ordered everyone to bow down to worship the statue whenever they heard certain music playing. It's kind of weird, but this is what he wanted. That was the command, right? And so if they chose not to do as ordered, they'd be thrown into a blazing fire, into a furnace. And the Bible tells us that there were three Jewish men named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or Benny for short, that works too, who were worshipers of God. And what they did is they refused to bow down to the statue. And now you could probably guess that the king wasn't thrilled by this news. And so, he ordered Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be brought to him. And the Bible says that he gave them one more chance to bow down and worship the statue when the music played, or else they would be thrown into the fire. But these three men stood their ground. They believed that God could rescue them, but even if he didn't, they still didn't want to turn from their devotion to him. Like, what an incredible example of courage and faith. But of course, the king is in full rage mode now. Like, we've got the Hulk here again, and I understand he's not a bad guy, but we're going to use him as an illustration again. Like, King Nebuchadnezzar has gone full Hulk mode, but in the most negative way possible. The dude he's pissed, essentially. Like, he's angry. And so what he does is he orders the fire to burn 7 times hotter than usual. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're tied up and they're thrown into the fire. And the furnace was so hot, the Bible says, that the soldiers who threw the men into the fire died simply from opening the doors and coming near the flames. Now look, I get that none of us have been thrown into fires recently, but I think we can agree that this feels unfair. And many of us do know what it feels like to be treated unfairly. Many of you know what it's like to be discriminated against because of the color of your skin, or treated like we're less than because of our family's finances, held back from certain opportunities because of our gender, considered less important because of something we have absolutely no control over. And if you've experienced this, you know that it can be scary, frustrating, and sad. These guys, I'm sure, they felt all of those things. But let's continue with the story. I want you to see what happens next after they were in the fire. We're going to turn over to Daniel chapter 3, verse 24 to 27. Let's find out what happens next. It says, "Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, 'Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?' And they replied, 'Certainly, your majesty.' He said, 'Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods.' And Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, 'Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here.' And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them." Now, there are many Bible scholars and researchers who have opinions about this story and who the 4th man in the fire was. Like was he God? Was he Jesus? Was it an angel? Was it someone else? And to be honest with you, who knows? But one thing is clear. In a moment of extreme injustice, they were not alone. God did not abandon them or leave them to suffer on their own. And in the exact same way, you are never alone when you face injustice. Let that sink in. When you experience injustice, you don't have to face it alone. You see, God cared about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and he made sure they weren't alone in their suffering or their injustice. And did things change eventually? Yes. Did the laws change as a result of the injustice? Yes. But don't miss what happened even while they were suffering. You see, God cared for them. And in the same way, God cares about you and doesn't want you to be alone when you face injustice. And so maybe you hear this story and you feel the injustice part. Maybe you're honestly like so tired and so hurt and so burned by things that you've experienced that you just don't know where to turn, I would love for you to know that you don't have to be alone. God is with you. He hears you. And if you're processing that for the first time, or you just don't know what to do next, I want to give you some steps just for you to consider. The first would be this: talk to Jesus through prayer. Like Jesus cares maybe even more than you realize, and he welcomes us to share our feelings of frustration and confusion or hurt. So talk to him. Feel free to do that, to vent, to speak to him. He cares. Secondly, remind yourself over and over that you are not alone. Number 3, remember that he will send others to be with you. Number 4, talk to your life group leader or talk to a trusted friend or adult. Even if you think they won't understand, honestly, keep talking until someone does. Next, consider talking to your family about maybe getting help from a professional counselor or mentor who can help you process the injustice that you experienced and can help you begin to heal. There is no shame in that whatsoever. Counseling is incredible. I have been to counseling and it is amazing. Next, keep moving. And that's kind of vague, but I honestly want to encourage you with that. The guys in the fire didn't give up. And now let's be honest, here is the truth. You shouldn't have to do anything about the injustice that's affecting you. Others should step up. Like if we're honest, generations older than you should have figured this out by now. It's unfair. And all of that is true, but at the same time, doing nothing isn't always helpful. And so if you can, keep moving. Do what you can to keep moving, even though it is on other people to cut it out. Some of you, however, may have heard that story and thought, well, I haven't really experienced injustice, and so does that mean I'm like the evil king who caused the injustice? And the answer is maybe, maybe not. Or perhaps, and this is probably true for a lot of us, perhaps it makes you like the people in the crowd that day who stood and watched the 3 men be thrown into the fire. They just stood there and watched while all of this was happening. You see, here's the deal. We all participate in injustice in some way, often by allowing it to happen while we watch. And so maybe you didn't throw someone in a fire, but maybe you laugh along when you hear a racist joke. Maybe you watch people get bullied, but you don't say anything. Maybe you listen to music that's degrading to women. Maybe you shop from stores that use child laborers to create their products. And this one is tricky, and to be honest with you, I'm guilty. But maybe some of you watching this want to do something about that. And so if this is you, any of these things is you, you've stood by and you've watched, I want you to know that you can talk to God about that too. We all need to be doing that. I love Psalm 139. The writer opens up and he asks God the most beautiful question, and I believe it is a question that we all should wake up every single day and ask. Psalm 139 verse 24, it says this: "See if there is any offensive way in me." If there's any offensive way, ways that I've offended you, God, primarily, and the things that you care about, like people, right? And the injustices that they're experiencing. And so that's the question. See if there is any offensive way in me. What if we stopped every day and just asked God to search our hearts? Start there. Ask God to help you see ways that you've participated in injustice. And this is so important because the truth is, some of the people that you care about most, some of the people that I care about most, my friends from school, from life groups, they've been on the receiving end of injustice. And maybe for the first time, you see it differently and you care differently because of how it affects you. We should let it become personal to us. Honestly, we should. And so when injustice happens, it's painful, but you don't have to face it alone. We can have every confidence that there is another in the fire. See, God sees you and he's with you and he cares about you. Sometimes these 4 words right here make things a little easier to handle. It doesn't solve all the problems. It doesn't make the hurt, the pain go away. It doesn't make the injustice go away. But the main idea of what I want you to know today can be summed up in these 4 words, and it does sometimes make it a little bit easier to handle. It's this: you are not alone.